Good morning, dear children. Welcome back. In today's session, we will continue our discussion of Class 7, Term 3, Unit 3 in Geography, Natural Hazards, Understanding of Disaster Management in Practice, Part 4. Come children, let us learn. Dears, before going into today's session, let us have a recap of what we learned in the last sessions. We understood about hazard and disaster. We learned that a hazard is a dangerous phenomenon, substance, human activity or condition that may cause loss of life, injury, health impact, property damage, loss of livelihood, services, social and economic disruption or environmental damage. A natural hazard are natural phenomena that might have negative impact on human or the environment. It is classified into two broad categories. They are geophysical and biological. A disaster is a serious disruption in the society causing a widespread material, economic, social or environmental losses which exceed the ability of the affected society to cope using its own resources. We learned that hazards are termed as disasters when they cause widespread destruction of property and human lives. There are two types of disasters, natural disaster and man-made disaster. Earthquake is a natural disaster and it is a sudden movement or trembling of the earth's crust is called as an earthquake. The movement of tectonic plates, mass wasting, landslides, surface fault, etc. cause earthquake. When the earthquake jolts the ocean floor, the sudden dislocation of the seabed occurs and the resulting displacement of water can produce one or more huge destructive waves known as tsunamis. It can cause flooding and disrupts transportation, power communication and water supply. Dear children, a flood is a sudden overflow of water in large amount caused due to heavy rainfall, cyclone, melting of snow, tsunami or even dam burst. A cyclone on the other hand is a low pressure area which is encircled by a high pressure wind. The main effects of tropical cyclone include heavy rain, strong wind, large storm surges near the landfall and tornadoes. We also learned about man-made disasters like stampede, fire and industrial disaster. A stampede is a sudden rush of a crowd of people resulting in injuries and death from suffocation and trampling. A fire is a disaster caused due to electrical short circuit, accidents in chemical factory, match and cracker factory. Industry faces multiple risks involved with its production, transportation, storage, usage and disposal of the effluents containing residuals and hazardous materials from nuclear and chemical industries. Example is Bhopal gas leakage. We also learned what is disaster management. It is a systematic process of applying administrative directives, organizations and operational skills and capacities to implement strategies, policies and improved coping capacities in order to lessen the adverse impacts of hazards and possibly of disaster. We also learned about the 6 disaster management phases that has been used in the concept of disaster cycle: preparedness, mitigation, prevention, response, recovery and development. Dear children, in this session we will discuss disaster management in India. Dear, why is mitigating the hazards essential? Why it is essential? It is more cost effective to mitigate the risks from natural disasters than to repair damage after the disaster. It is always try to prevent the risks rather than trying to repair the damage. We have already heard of the proverb, prevention is better than cure. Hazard mitigation refers to any action or project that reduces the effects of future disasters. So hazard mitigation is any action or project that reduces the effect of future hazards or disasters. Now we will learn about the warning systems we have in our country, India. We have Department of Science and Technology DST and Department of Space DOS and CSIR laboratories have set up early warning systems for tsunami and storm surges in Indian Ocean. So our Department of Science and Technology and Department of Space as well as CSIR labs have set up early warning systems. There is warning system of tsunamis in the ocean. The National Disaster Management Authority or NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, is an agency of the Ministry of Home Affairs whose primary purpose is to coordinate response to natural or man-made disasters and for capacity building in disaster resiliency and crisis response. So it is an agency, NDMA or National Disaster Management Authority is an agency under Ministry of Home Affairs, and the aim of this agency is to coordinate response to natural or man-made disasters and also for capacity building in disaster resiliency and crisis response. NDMA was established through the Disaster Management Act enacted by the Government of India on 23rd December 2005. So it came into being according to an act on 23rd December 2005. The National Disaster Response Force NDRF is a specialized force constituted for the purpose of specialist response through a threatening disaster situation or disaster under the Disaster Management Act of 2005. So we have two agencies, National Disaster Management Authority and National Disaster Response Force. We also have National Institute of Disaster Management NIDM, which is a premier institute for training and capacity development programs for managing natural disasters in India on a national as well as regional basis. So there are three agencies for that. First one is National Disaster Management Authority, the National Disaster Response Force as well as National Institute of Disaster Management. The first two is coming under the Disaster Management Act of 2005, and this is an National Institute of Disaster Management is an institute for training and capacity development programs. Now we will discuss about the disaster management in Tamil Nadu. The Tamil Nadu State Disaster Management Authority is responsible for all measures for mitigation, preparedness, response and recovery are undertaken under the guidance and supervision of the authority. So they are in charge of all the measures for mitigation, preparedness, response and recovery. The Tamil Nadu State Disaster Response Force SDRF has been constituted with a strength of 80 police personnel. So we are having in Tamil Nadu State Disaster Response Force. They have been trained in disaster management and rescue operations in consultation with National Disaster Response Force. So they have got training under the guidance of National Disaster Response Force. The District Disaster Management Authority or DDMA is responsible for disaster management at a district level. So you have state level disaster management authority and you have a state disaster response force as well as district management authority, disaster management authority at the district level. Now let us learn about the state disaster management plan. The Perspective Plan 2018 to 2030 prepared by the Revenue and Disaster Management Department. So it is a long-term plan from 2018 to 2030. Hotline between Indian Meteorological Department and State Emergency Operations Center is established, and mitigation in the district is done through telephone, fax and IP phones also available, which connect the state with district headquarters, taluks and blocks of the state. So there is a hotline established between the Meteorological Department and the State Emergency Operations Center. Also you have telephone connections, fax connections and internet phones available to connect state with the district headquarters, taluks and blocks. Wireless radio network with both high frequency and very high frequency are also available in the state. Not only that, you have, suppose the phone is dead or telephone connection cannot be established, then you have another option like high frequency and low frequency network, radio network, wireless radio network is also available with our state. Now children, let us learn about the general survival techniques. What are the various survival methods in case of a disaster? First, we will see how can we survive an earthquake. During an earthquake, be under the table, chair, or kneel to the floor and protect yourself. Go near a sturdy wall, sit on the floor and hold the floor strongly and protect yourself. Next thing is you should use only torch lights. During flood forecast, store up necessary things like first aid. Listen to the local radio or TV for instruction. Cut off all the electrical supplies during flood and earthquake. In case of fire accidents, dial 101 for fire service. So you can have, if you are in the midst of an earthquake, you can go under the table or chair or kneel to the floor to protect yourself, or go and stand near a sturdy wall, a thick wall, or sit on the floor and hold the floor strongly. During flood, you have to store up the necessary things like first aid. Then listen to the radio or TV for instructions. You must make sure that you cut off all the electrical supplies during flood and earthquake. In case of a fire, dial 101. If the clothes are on fire, don't run. Just stop, drop and roll. That's what you have to do in the case of a fire. You should not be running. It will make the fire worse. So just don't run. You just stop, you drop down and roll on the floor. Road accidents can be avoided by permitting the persons only who have license are allowed to drive. So people who own the license are only allowed to drive. That is very essential thing, because children, you have a tendency to ride your parents' vehicle, but you can drive it only after you get your license. That you'll get your license once you complete your 16 years of age. You can get your license, and full vehicle license you can get after you're completed 18 years, that you are eligible for vote. That time you can get your driving license. Learn, preach and practice safety rules during walking and driving along the road. You should always practice safety rules. Rail safety tips. Stay alert. Trains can come from either directions at any time. You should be very careful when you are on the railway track. You will be thinking only from one direction the train will come. It's not so. Both directions the train can come. Never sit on the edge of the station platform. You should never sit on the edge. Cross the tracks safely. In case you have to cross the tracks, that case you have to be very careful. While on boarding the aircraft, pay attention to the flight crew safety demonstration and read the safety briefing card available in the seat pocket carefully. So if you are about to board an aircraft, there will be instructions will be given by the flight crew. You have to listen to that, or you can always read the safety briefing card which is available in the seat pocket. It is time to go through the glossary. Hazard, H-A-Z-A-R-D, hazard is a dangerous event. Disaster, D-I-S-A-S-T-E-R, disaster is an event which causes enormous damage to property and life. Number 3, vulnerability, V-U-L-N-E-R-A-B-I-L-I-T-Y, vulnerability is severity. Mitigate, M-I-T-I-G-A-T, mitigate is reduce or make something less severe. Meteorology, M-E-T-E-O-R-O-L-O-G-Y, meteorology is forecasting of weather. Trembling, T-R-E-M-B-L-I-N-G, trembling is shaking or vibration. Preventive, P-R-E-V-E-N-T-I-V-E, preventive is stop something before it happens. Extinguish, E-X-T-I-N-G-U-I-S-H, extinguish is to stop a fire or light. Emergency, E-M-E-R-G-E-N-C-Y. Emergency is a serious or dangerous situation. Psychological, P-S-Y-C-H-O-L-O-G-I-C-A-L. Psychological is mental or emotional state of a person. Time to wind up today's session. Before winding up, let us have a recap of what we learned here. In this session, we discussed about disaster management in India. We learned that National Disaster Management Authority or NDMA is the agency of your Ministry of Home Affairs whose purpose is to coordinate response to natural or man-made disasters. The National Disaster Response Force NDRF is a specialized force constituted by the purpose of specialist response to a threatening disaster. Both these agencies are established under the Disaster Management Act 2005. We also have National Institute of Disaster Management NIDM, which is a premier institute for training and capacity development programs for managing natural disasters in India. Coming to disaster management in Tamil Nadu, we have the Tamil Nadu State Disaster Management Authority TNSDMA, who is responsible for all measures of mitigation, preparedness, response and recovery. The Tamil Nadu State Disaster Response Force has been constituted with a strength of 80 police personnel. They have been trained in disaster management and rescue operations. The District Disaster Management Authority DDMA is responsible for disaster management at the district level. We also learnt about the general survival techniques in the case of an earthquake, in the case of a flood, or in the case of road and rail accidents, and safety while traveling in the aircraft. Dear children, in the next session we will do the evaluation. Dear children, in the next session we will do the evaluation part. Now it is time for worksheet number 4. Question number 1. Name any two agencies which involves in warning systems in Tamil Nadu. Name any two agencies which are involved in the warning system of Tamil Nadu. Question number 2. Write about any three effects of flood. Write about any three effects of flood. Question number 3. Give any 4 rail safety tips. Give any 4 rail safety tips. Question number 4. Write about any 5 survival techniques. Write about any 5 survival techniques. With that, we come to end of today's session, children. Thank you for watching. For more videos, please subscribe our channel youtube.com/Samacheer Kalvi Guide.